Tamasam Bhagavanto Arahanto Samma Sambuddhassa Namo Tassa Bhagavanto Arahanto Samma Sambuddhassa Namo Tassa Bhagavanto Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa Buddhang Dhammang Sanghang Namasam. Okay, good morning. Today I've been asked to continue the readings for the next couple of days, so I was quite looking forward to doing a bit of reading from the Autobiography of Ajahn Dtun, who many of us have met before. He's a very senior monk in our tradition, and he's a direct disciple of Luang Por Chah, and now he has quite a well-established monastery in Thailand, and he's extremely well known and well respected in Thailand for being an incredible teacher and an incredible practitioner. So I've read his autobiography now several times, and I found it incredibly inspiring. And I was thinking particularly because we've been talking a lot about the contemplations of Asubha and Marananusati, and these were practices that were really fundamental for him for a number of years when he first ordained, and in his autobiography he really goes into an incredible amount of detail describing the ways that he practiced with these different contemplations. So I think it's really helpful to read about how really well practiced a monk like him made use of these and really kind of brought it into his own practice. Just also to mention a few things maybe to keep in mind, that he's definitely not an ordinary monk or an ordinary practitioner, and even from the beginning of his story, when he was a layperson, he was already experiencing all kinds of extraordinary things. So in reading his story, I think it's important to remember that he definitely is an extraordinary person, and it's maybe not the best thing to try to emulate him completely. We have to kind of realize that by the time he ordained as a monk and was taking on a lot of these practices, he already had quite incredible success in meditation, and his meditation was very strong. So we might find that for ourselves we're not quite at that level, so we have to kind of keep that in mind as well. It's also, I think, quite easy if we read like a biography like this to maybe feel like a bit depressed about our own practice, because he's the kind of person who, it seems like he was almost born enlightened. Even the stories from when he was a lay person are quite incredible. So maybe just to keep in mind that certainly somebody like this has probably done a lot more practice than we have, and for many lifetimes probably. So not to use it as something that we maybe kind of get down on ourselves about, but maybe more as something to aspire to in the future, maybe in this life or maybe in a future life. But for myself, just reading through it has been quite inspiring to read his stories, and he really goes into an incredible amount of detail about the different things that he experienced. So I think it's good just to keep those things in mind while we listen, and maybe just for the next few days, then I'll just read different sections of his autobiography, starting from the beginning when he was a lay person, and Most all of the stories that I'll read just take place like within the first 5 years of his monk's life. And if people are interested to read more, this book is actually in the free distribution book room, so I highly recommend it. Okay, so I'll begin with the first short story, just beginning with when he was still a layman, going to university, and at that time he really hadn't done any kind of meditation before, but it was really the beginning of his spiritual journey. If I remember correctly, it was probably during my second year at university that there was a time when I was riding on a bus and gazed at the people outside. As I looked, I began to feel quite peculiar because I started to think, we humans are just one kind of animal, that's all. It's merely a convention of the world that we call ourselves human, yet in truth we are no different from pigs, cows, or buffalo. When they die, they decompose, and so do we. The mind takes up residence in our body, but the body is no different from that of an animal or robot. Our mind gives orders and the body acts accordingly, but at the time of death, all that remains is a body that is in no way different from that of an animal. At that time, there were many occasions that I viewed humans in strange ways, quite different from before. When I saw people at bus stops either standing, walking, talking, or going about other activities, such as combing their hair, smiling, laughing, or frowning, I would think that humans and animals are in no way different, except for humans possessing greater intelligence and a superior mind, that's all. Each person's bodily gestures and movements were being dictated merely by the power of their minds. These thoughts made me feel a bit weary with the human condition. During my third year at university, whenever I was feeling ill, say with a stomach ache, diarrhea, or even the urge to urinate, I would always ask myself, hey, what's going on? Here I am feeling unwell, and yet I can't tell my body to be free from these pains and discomfort. I thought this body is mine. Why then is it outside of my control? This certainly shows the body does not belong to me. At about that time, I began to regularly contemplate things in this way, reflecting that if the body was truly mine, then I should be able to command it to be free of illness, or when the urge to urinate or defecate occurs while traveling, I should be able to tell the body, please wait, don't allow the urge to come on before I get home. Why is it that the body is completely outside of my control? These reflections caused me to begin seeing the true nature of the body, seeing that it's not mine, as it is totally outside of my control. One day at university, I was sitting talking with some friends when I noticed a university bus pull in to let its passengers off. As some girls got off the bus and walked past where I was sitting, one girl caught my attention because I thought she was attractive. I thought to myself, if she remains beautiful for more than 3 months, I will try to get to know her. But upon seeing her again on another day, she didn't look the same as before. On this day, she no longer looked beautiful because she had changed her hairstyle, and so I never did get to know her. On another occasion, I saw a different girl whom I felt attracted to because she was also good looking. And again, I thought if she is still beautiful after 3 months, I will try to get to know her. But on a later day, upon seeing her again, she no longer looked attractive because she dressed differently. As it turned out, there wasn't one girl in the entire university who could remain attractive for more than 3 months, and so I never did get to know any of them. I thought to myself that I will associate with females only platonically and wait until I've finished my studies and have a job before considering starting a relationship. Every girl that I thought was beautiful would, on seeing them only a few times, quickly appear not to be so. As a result, I no longer felt interested in females. It wasn't until I ordained that I understood that my feelings and way of viewing things whilst being a student was based on insight, vipassana, that is, seeing the immutable nature of human beings or physical phenomena. Not long after this, I saw a friend of mine arguing with his girlfriend. Whilst arguing, the girl's face didn't look at all attractive. I asked myself, where exactly should I find attraction in a woman? An answer sprung up telling me, be attracted to their heart's innate qualities. Sometimes when I looked at buildings, temples, uposatha halls, or went to beautiful places, my mind would always contemplate the decline and deterioration of these things or places. I would see things degenerate until they crumbled apart, then reflect and bring them back to their original condition. I would see the disintegration and ultimate dissolution of everything, seeing that their nature is to come into existence, remain for a time, and finally break apart. During my 4th year at university, there were some days I felt that my head was completely filled with thoughts, my mind thinking continuously without any respite until 10 or 11 at night. Once when my mind was thinking endlessly, the thought arose, hey, why can't I stop my mind from thinking? This shows that the mind is not mine, I'm not its owner. Fortunately, I could remember having read some parts of the biography of Venerable Ajahn Dtun, where he taught the mountain folk to search for Buddha by sitting in meditation for 5 or 10 minutes a day. At that time, a feeling arose that I wanted to do the same, so late that night I went up and sat in the shrine room, and in no time at all the thoughts stopped, and I began to feel peaceful and at ease. I focused my awareness on the breath together with the recitation of the meditation word Buddha, on the inhalation mentally reciting Bud, and on the exhalation To. My mind stopped thinking and held to its awareness of the breath, feeling content and relaxed. After that, whenever I was continuously thinking, I would go to the shrine room and sit in meditation. Once, while in meditation, one of my legs felt sore, and I reflected that this body doesn't belong to me. It's merely made up of the 4 elements. I reflected only for a brief moment, but my mind acknowledged the truth of the reflection, and then unified in concentration, plummeting downwards 3 times. All perception of the breath, body, and meditation word Buddha completely disappeared, and I was left feeling perfectly contented. I thought to myself that if I could, I would gladly remain in this state of bliss and not return to the normal human state again. I felt so sublimely happy, happiness of a kind that I cannot explain. I even thought that all the happiness that can possibly be derived from the world can't be compared to the happiness experienced when the mind is in this state. The instant that I had this thought, awareness arose asking, where has the body disappeared to? Where has the breath gone? Where has Buddha disappeared to? Having noticed that all perception of my breath and body had completely disappeared, I tried to move my body, and eventually my awareness of the breath gradually returned, the breath becoming coarser until returning to normal. The whole experience left me feeling most surprised. During the final term of my 4th year, there was a day when I was standing on the bus traveling to university. As I rode, a vision of the Jinarat Buddha statue appeared just in front of my forehead. The statue was golden with a silver aura framing it. I saw the same vision over several days, each time lasting for about 5 minutes. Just standing there and having a vision like this arise before me made me wonder if I was going crazy, but I was able to keep my senses and mindfully watch what was going on. Not long after this, whenever I traveled between home and university, I would view the other people on the bus in accordance with the characteristics of birth, aging, and sickness. My mind would reflect in this way by itself and then turn the reflection inwards onto itself. When looking at a young baby, I would think, to be born is really suffering. How much suffering and happiness must this child experience before it grows to the age I am? I would then turn the reflection onto myself, thinking, I too was once a baby like this young child. To reach the age I am now, I've had to experience alternating happiness and unhappiness. Life is so tedious. When this thought had finished, I looked at another person and could tell by his face and eyes that he was sick, experiencing a lot of pain and suffering due to some kind of health problem. After contemplating the condition of this person, I further reflected that I too experienced sickness and could clearly see that sickness is likewise a source of suffering for myself. Once this thought had finished, I looked about on the bus and my eyes caught sight of an elderly person, about the age of 60 to 70 years old. I reflected that everyone must grow old like this person. We must all surely meet with old age in the future, whereby our hair grays, the skin withers, and teeth deteriorate. Looking at it, it's not nice at all, yet I too will be like that in the future. Aging was seen to be suffering. My mind then contemplated that at some time not too far off, everyone on this bus must die, with not one of us remaining. I saw that death was also a cause of suffering. After reflecting this way, I thought, this body that I depend on isn't mine, because in times of sickness, or as the body ages, or when it's about to die, I have no power to control or forbid the changes from taking place. This thought left me with a great feeling of disenchantment and weariness with the human condition. Awareness arose within me that birth is the cause of suffering. I thought to myself, I don't want to take birth again. I will look for a way to avoid future rebirth. Back then, my mind would reflect like this almost every day. Every time I traveled by bus to university, I would always see babies, sick people, and elderly people, and my mind would naturally reflect like this for 10 or 20 minutes, each time giving rise to a feeling of being soberly saddened and disenchanted, not wanting to take birth again. After that, I would always think that whenever I'm ready, I will ordain and not disrobe. I thought that this would happen in no more than 5 years' time, after having spent 2 years studying a master's degree and a period of 3 years working to offer some financial assistance to my father. However, until that time, I will attempt to be a good, virtuous person and try to frequently reflect on greed, aversion, and delusion so as to gradually abandon these states. Eventually, when the time comes, I should then be ready to ordain without ever disrobing. By this time, keeping the 5 precepts became normal for me, and my mind was no longer the same as before. If I was going anywhere and I saw a Buddha statue in a temple or a footprint of the Buddha, I would bow to it, and with my hands in Anjali, I would make the following aspiration. If the true Dhamma of the Buddha is still surviving, being the most excellent and purest of all teachings that will lead one beyond suffering, then may I meet this path and proceed in the most correct and direct manner. I would make an aspiration like this every time. Nobody had ever told me to do so. My heart did so of its own will. During my remaining time at university, I would try to think only good, wholesome thoughts that were beneficial and endeavor to not let my mind think about whatever wasn't good or beneficial. Whenever unwholesome thoughts arose, I would make the effort to bring my awareness to my breathing in coordination with the meditation word Bhutto. By doing this, the unwholesome thoughts would disappear. At the time when I deeply perceived that birth, aging, sickness, and death were bound up with suffering, my heart had no wish to take a rebirth of any kind whatsoever. It made me think of how the Lord Buddha had clearly seen these 4 conditions before I ever had. He saw the inherent suffering in these 4 conditions, causing him to renounce his royal status and wealth to become a samana, until finally attaining full enlightenment to become the Buddha. I understood why he renounced the lay life to become a seeker. I thought that I probably have a sufficient store of merit that enables my heart to perceive birth, aging, sickness, and death as suffering as well. Everybody should be able to see things in line with the truth as the Buddha did, but very few people do. They merely know that all beings, once born, must die, but they don't see this deeply within their hearts. By 1977, during my 4th and final year at university, I wasn't going out very much because I was keeping the 5 precepts. When I went to the university library, I would sometimes see Dhamma books and read a few pages. Around that time, I was aware that my heart was beginning to turn towards the Dhamma. At one time, when I was feeling comfortable and at ease, and my mind was completely free of thoughts and emotions, a thought arose telling me, if I ordain in this lifetime, this birth will be my last. I thought it was strange that those words came up in my mind, because at that time, I wasn't yet ready to ordain. Back then, I was always thinking that I will keep on developing goodness until I die. If ever I'm ready to ordain, then I will, but if not, I will continue on with my Dhamma practice. Sometimes when traveling to university, I would look at other people and be overcome by feelings of disenchantment. One time, while traveling to another province on holiday, I fell asleep on the bus, and when I awoke, I saw everything as a supa. Everybody on the bus appeared to be corpses which were beginning to decay. Even the driver was decomposing, and the bus appeared to be falling to pieces. It really seemed like everyone riding on the bus was dead, and that no one was able to know where the bus was taking them to. At that time, I couldn't figure out where we were all going to. It merely appeared that everyone was dead except for me. I could only but think that the bus was taking us towards death waiting up ahead. In my mind, I was picturing an image of the bus taking us into an abyss, which was certainly going to be our death. It was saddening to realize that nobody on the bus was going to escape death. This thought did, however, bring the mind back to normality, and I was able to evaluate the thoughts that had just passed. As always, it made me think that I shouldn't be heedless in how I live my life, encouraging me to develop only goodness while refraining from all that is unwholesome. I was able to see images as vivid as this, and yet I still couldn't ordain. The defilements in the hearts of human beings are truly dense. In about April 1978, I began to observe the 8 precepts. After keeping them for about 3 weeks, I contemplated what reasons were preventing me from ordaining at that time. I could think of just 2. Firstly, I was concerned about the welfare of my father and brothers. Secondly, I still had the natural urges and desires of a human being. My character is that I prefer to do things when I feel ready and see there is a good reason to be doing so without needing to force myself. When my mind feels ready, that is when I act, but if it doesn't feel so, then I have to give it a reasonable amount of time. I thought whenever I can put aside these 2 reasons, I would ordain, giving myself at most 5 years to take care of this. Soon after I reflected on the first reason, my concern for my father and brothers, I considered how all beings are the owners of their karma, heirs to their karma. They originate from their karma, are bound to their karma, and have their karma as their refuge. Whatever karma they do, for good or for ill, of that they will be the heir. I was preoccupied with my concerns for others, but surely they must be capable of helping themselves. As I reflected on this, I saw just how true it is. How could I possibly help them? They were all mature adults, possessing competent mental faculties, with each having their own responsibilities in life, faring according to their karma. Having seen this to be true, I gave up this concern. The second reason was taken care of around mid-April 1978. I thought of 3 girls that I considered attractive. The instant I thought of the first girl's face, her skin started to peel off, and blood and pus began trickling down her face. My mind had witnessed her innate unattractiveness. I then thought of the second girl. As soon as I pictured her face, in a single moment, her skin also began to peel off, with blood and pus running down her face. A feeling of dispassion and disenchantment arose in my heart. When I thought of the third girl, the same thing happened, and her skin peeled down with her face oozing blood and pus. My heart was affected and filled with an even stronger sense of sobering dispassion and disappointment at the sight of this. And I thought that if women are like this, then I no longer wish to live the household life. Since that day, whenever I look at a female, I feel no desire, because my mind has always sustained the feeling of disenchantment. When I look at them, there is just looking, just seeing. Once my heart began to perceive women as unattractive, I started to have thoughts of never marrying. Instead, I just wanted to continue with my practice until the time was right for me to ordain. During the month of May 1978, a question would always keep coming to mind. I would ask myself, how will I know that ordaining is the true path to prevent renewed existence? One day in the same month, I was riding on a bus, returning home from university. The thought, how will I know that this is the most correct path, arose in my mind. The answer came back by means of a mental vision. I saw 2 bowls of the same kind of spicy curry. The appearance of the curry in the first bowl looked far more appetizing than the second bowl, and so I took a serving from it. It was delicious, and so I thought to eat only from the first bowl every day, and showed no interest at all in the less inviting second bowl. After eating every day from the first bowl, I began to grow bored of it, so I turned and saw the second bowl and thought to give it a taste. On taking the first mouthful, I exclaimed in my heart, oh, the second bowl was even tastier than the first. Every day I've been so foolish in thinking only to eat from the first bowl, without knowing that it doesn't taste anywhere near as good as the second. From now on, I'm no longer going to eat from the first bowl. An explanation subsequently came to mind, seeing the first bowl of curry as being analogous to the lay life that I was currently living, in accordance with worldly ways and values. The second bowl represented the life of a religious seeker, one ordained who cultivates the mind until no longer taking future rebirth, meaning living one's life in accordance with the Dhamma. Initially, I was born and lived my life in the conventional worldly way, which is similar to eating from the first curry, until eventually growing tired and disenchanted with it, that is, lay life. My wish to not take birth again was shown by eating from the first bowl until becoming bored of it, tasting and experiencing the deliciousness of the second curry, and seeing how the first bowl absolutely paled in comparison was like when I had the opportunity to experience the joy and bliss that comes from sitting in meditation. I was therefore able to see that living an ordinary, worldly life is in no way comparable to the peace and calm attained from meditation. By comparing the two, it clearly revealed how the second bowl was so much more flavorful. The pleasure and happiness that comes from living the life of a samana is greater than that of the lay life, for it enables one to transcend suffering. So now I wanted just to skip ahead a little bit to point after he ends up going to Wat Papong to ordain as a monk with Lumpur Cha. And I just wanted to read a short story from when he's first ordained as an anagarika, as a white-robed postulant. For my first meal as anagarika at Wat Papong, I had to put all my food into a white enameled basin. When I had almost finished my meal, there still remained a slice of coconut milk jelly that had been covered in curry sauce. As soon as I put the pudding in my mouth and tasted it, I found it to be very unpleasant and immediately spat it out into a spittoon. I cautioned myself, asking, "Why didn't you eat it? In the stomach, are there different passages for savory and sweet food?" My mind replied, "No, there isn't. The stomach has only one passage." I further asked myself, "Why is it that other people can eat this food and yet I can't?" I felt down on myself for having lost to the kilesas and immediately made a resolution that from then on, if any day I eat food with desire, I will stop and not eat more on that day. As I walked to wash my food basin, I was still feeling annoyed at myself for having been defeated by the kilesas. I said to myself that I'm going to completely eradicate the defilements from my mind. After I had finished washing my basin and had returned to the meeting hall, a lay disciple of Lumpur Cha came to get me, telling me to go and pay respects to Lumpur and submit myself as a disciple. Once I had bowed to him and offered my tray of candles, incense, and flowers, he asked me about my background and what I'd been doing before coming to ordain. He then told me, "Make a good job of it, completely eradicate the defilements from your mind." I thought it was strange that I'd only just uttered this sentence to myself when walking to wash my food basin. Every day afterwards, before eating my meal, both as a layperson and as a monk, I reflected on the food that I was about to eat, to see its intrinsic repulsiveness, and seeing that it's made up of earth, water, air, and fire, so as to make my mind equanimous and focused. While eating, I reflected on the arising and disappearing of the food's taste as it contacted the taste buds, knowing whether the food was sour, salty, or sweet, and whether it tasted good or not, further reflecting that once the food goes down the throat, it has no flavor at all. If I didn't have enough time to reflect before eating the food, I concentrated my mind until it felt equanimous, and then mindfully reflected on the food while eating. If I still was not satisfied with the food reflection, I would contemplate again after the meal, seeing how all the food that has gone into the stomach is then metabolized by the digestive juices and bodily fire element. Whatever is of benefit to the body is absorbed for nourishment, and what is not is excreted as the earth and water elements. Reflecting in this way made my mind equanimous. I did this practice every day. So now I'd like to just skip ahead a little bit here, beginning with a few stories around Ajahn Dtun's first year as a monk at Wat Papong. One day, the cremation of an elderly woman took place in the monastery. The funeral chanting was at 2 p.m. and the cremation itself started at about 5 p.m. The event made me see how the separation from all that one loves and cherishes is a great source of suffering. I reflected on this with an aim to be as heedful as I possibly could at all times. That evening at about 9 or 10 p.m., I was walking meditation at my kuti, which was located about 300 meters from the cremation site. While walking, I noticed that fear had arisen in my mind when thinking of the cremation site. So I lit a kerosene lantern and walked off by myself to the small hill where the site was. I stood at the pyre and watched as it burned the woman's body. All around me I could hear the whistling of the wind as it passed through the tops of the bamboo thickets, and fear entered into my mind again. I told myself that I will not return to my kuti until the fear subsides. I stood there and composed my mind till it became peaceful, and then I contemplated the burning body to see that it's made up of earth, water, air, and fire. I then turned the contemplation onto myself to see that I too will be just the same one day. Upon seeing this, my mind temporarily let go of its attachment to the body, and the fear completely disappeared. When I opened my eyes, I saw the skull roll down off of the pyre off to the side, and I could clearly see the abdomen and intestines still contained a lot of fluid, making it difficult to burn. I picked up a length of bamboo to push the remains back into the fire. I did this because I wanted to counter my fear. Once my fear had gone, I walked back to my kuti. While walking for alms one day in the village of Ban Klang Yai, I noticed a rather attractive woman, and yet when seeing her, there was just seeing. As I started to walk away after receiving her alms food, I wondered what would happen if I look at her, because I'd heard it's not good for monks to look at women. I turned around just for a second to have another look at her, and in the blink of an eye, she turned into a corpse. All I saw was a skeleton with flesh sticking to the bones, being merely elements. I was startled by the sight and quickly turned around, though I did feel satisfied with the Sapawa Dhamma that I had witnessed. And footnote, Sapawa Dhamma, defined as condition of nature, generally referring to reality, manifesting as natural states, phenomena or insights that arise spontaneously in the mind. On the evening of that same day, which happened to be the observance day, there was the usual meeting in the meditation hall. As a rule, I would go to the hall before the scheduled time and sit in meditation until it was time for the chanting. While chanting, I closed my eyes, but then opened them to look around to see whether or not a lot of lay people had come to the meeting. As I looked, I was startled to see that all the lay people in the entire community of monks and novices that had assembled in the hall, with the exception of myself, were corpses that were either rotting or dried up. Since that day, if ever I thought to focus on anyone, they immediately became a corpse. At times when I wasn't doing anything in particular, I would sometimes focus on the other monks and see them in the same way. It was actually quite fun. Seeing things in this way, although strange, was of great benefit to me because it spared me the problem faced by other monks in that I didn't spend much time thinking about the opposite sex. I felt contented, but I didn't allow myself to be too pleased because I'd always try to be careful and alert. When putting forth effort in the practice, it's not possible to see immediate results because we've let our minds run free for who knows how many years. The practice must be gone about steadily. However much one can do, one should be satisfied with that, but one must practice regularly. A large water jar can eventually be filled by individual drops of water. During the rains retreat, I was able to look at both humans and animals and automatically see them as corpses. I didn't have to mentally determine this. It happened all by itself for me to see with my actual eyes. Later, however, I could make it happen at my own discretion, looking at anyone and viewing them as a corpse. Sometimes I would focus on the lay people who came to make offerings, or at times look at the other monks and novices to see them all as dried up or rotting corpses. At other times, everybody would appear as walking skeletons, or in a manner similar to this. On alms round, I would focus on the monks walking in front of me as being skeletons dressed in tattered robes, and I would determine to see the people offering food as corpses. I did this to the extent that if I ever thought of a female or a friend, a vision of that person would come to my mind with their skin and flesh peeling off by layers until leaving only the bones and then disappearing. This whole process happened in a moment. It was like this every time I thought of someone. It just happened by itself. These visions appeared in my mind until I felt completely repelled by them and nauseated, to the extent that I sometimes thought I would vomit. I stopped determining to see things as a subha for a period of time, because physically it was making me feel unwell, while mentally I felt deeply disenchanted. Consequently, I just continued with my normal practice of sitting and walking meditation. Every day after finishing each period of sitting and walking meditation, I would be attentive to maintain constant mindfulness. Around the month of November, shortly after the end of the rains retreat, I continued on with my practice as normal. As I set off on alms round one morning, I was attentively keeping close watch on my mind. When I entered the village for alms, I saw all the villagers and animals as corpses, and the entire village, its buildings and objects, appeared derelict. Some of the houses were covered with cobwebs, while others looked ready to fall down. The whole village was in a tumble-down state of disrepair. When looking at any actual object, a superimposed image of the same object would appear, whereby I would see it as a subha in a state of decay. At that moment, the entire village with its occupants and animals were seen by the mind as being in a state of degeneration. As I approached the monastery, the side of the wall was superimposed by an image of a collapsed wall, revealing the nature of decay, and when I entered the monastery, it was as if the place had been abandoned. All I did was try to keep my mindfulness firmly established while the spontaneous images and states were manifesting for my mind to witness. I watched with indifference, not thinking anything at all, other than exclaiming to myself, "What is this? Okay, whatever happens, let it happen. I'm not afraid." When I looked down at the pathways, the earth looked as if it were old and green with algae, like they'd never been walked on before. When I looked up at the trees, they all appeared to be dried up and dead. For about 2 days, I saw everything in this manner until it began to seem normal. While seeing these sabhava dhammas of decay and deterioration, my mind merely watched the changing phenomena with a cool indifference, without thinking or conceptualizing about anything that was happening. When I recalled what had happened in the past 2 days, I wondered why these states arose. I therefore wrote a letter to my father relating the various sabhava dhamma that had arisen, and asked him to pass the letter to Lumpur Cha. The letter would have taken some time to reach him because back then traveling wasn't as convenient as it is today. In the meantime, I went about my daily practice as normal. One morning, a few days later, I returned to my kuti after the meal. Once having taken care of my personal business, I started sweeping the veranda floor in preparation for walking meditation. As I did so, I thought of the events over the past few days. At that moment, an understanding arose in my heart, exclaiming, "All that arises must by its very nature cease." In that moment, my mind clearly saw the decay and decline inherent in everything. I felt as though my mind had lucidly seen the very nature of these natural phenomena until it acknowledged the truth. All that arises is of the nature to cease. It seemed like within a single mind moment, the mind had flipped over. This was due to its understanding the sabhava dhamma and knowing full well the meaning of what had taken place in the mind. Since that moment, I sensed that my heart had been greatly transformed, as if it had been turned over. When looking at any material object, the mind knew that it was merely a composition of natural elements. It didn't view anything as being attractive in any way at all. A friend later brought 2 umbrella tents of the same style that he had made himself for me to look at. He asked me which one looked the best. The true feeling in my heart was that neither looked beautiful. They both seemed to be just the same, because I was looking at them more deeply to see that both were only the 4 elements of nature that had combined to make an object. Nevertheless, I mindfully considered both of them and answered using the conventional understanding that this one or that one looks more beautiful, even though my actual feeling was that nothing appealed as being beautiful. I felt that my own thoughts and feelings were now at complete variance with others. My mind state when looking at material objects was that in seeing them there was only looking, without there being any feeling of attraction or aversion. I knew that my mind had irrevocably separated from material, inanimate form. Despite this, another higher sense of knowing arose within my mind that told me, "This state can't be taken for certain. Continue to watch it mindfully." I thought to myself that this, which I have come to know, to see and comprehend clearly, is something completely normal. It's the inherent nature of all things, but before now I didn't know this. Once seen and understood, one shouldn't deludedly take it up as belonging to oneself. Instead, one should know things in accordance with their nature and then let them go, without attaching to them as being self. The events that had arisen were merely sabhava dhammas. They arose for the mind to see the true nature of things, so that it could release its grasping and attachment to them. Ever since witnessing and understanding well the state of decline and deterioration, my mind, when seeing material forms, just sees them without feeling any attraction or aversion. Yet I still know whether that object is beautiful or not. Also, at the time of seeing the state of decline and decay, I felt there was no distinction between men and women, because when we die, everybody is exactly the same. We all decompose and break apart into elements. The disenchantment and weariness that I felt within my heart was so great that my mind no longer wished to do any further contemplation. Since that moment, I no longer felt any sexual desire. Even if I were to think about women in any way, it still didn't arise. The desire had disappeared. Women have normally never been a problem that's created any distress for me since ordaining. Actually, I considered the whole matter to be extremely easy, because my mind held no desire for them, even though the mood still existed. As soon as a thought or mood arose, I'd replace it with an asubha contemplation, and the mood would disappear. Thus, sexual lust has never been a threat to me in any way. When I first ordained, if ever any such thoughts or moods arose, they wouldn't last for long, perhaps for 3 or 5 minutes before fading away. Later, as I became skilled at contemplating unattractiveness, when any sexual thought or mood began to form, I would immediately bring up an asubha reflection. In doing so, the feelings of pleasure or attraction wouldn't arise. This is why the whole matter has been very easy for me. I reflected on unattractiveness to the extent that even something as small as looking at young boys and girls, if I thought they looked cute, I would still call up an asubha image to destroy that feeling. The moment when my heart witnessed the natural state of decay, I experienced the strongest feeling of disenchantment, so I refrained from doing any kind of contemplation. At that time, all feelings of sexual desire were absent from my mind, but I didn't wholly believe the situation and thought for myself, what is this? I've practiced for only 3 or 4 months. Could sexual lust really be finished? I'm going to keep an eye on this. When my mind saw that the inherent nature of all material form and substance is to degenerate, it clearly perceived the state of true reality, vimutti, and thus understood relative conventional reality. My mind perceived all forms as being just elements and remained equanimous by having no feelings of attraction or aversion for them. In seeing them, there was just seeing. At the time, a clear knowing emerged in my heart that the mind had separated from material, inanimate form. This was a totally new understanding for me, something I had never known before. Along with it was a letting go due to my understanding that the sabhava dhammas I had clearly seen and known in line with the truth were in their natural state. Everything without exception comes into existence, remains for a time, and finally ceases before breaking apart. The mind of an ordinary person, however, will not acknowledge these conditions as they naturally and truly are, and so they deludedly attach to what has come into existence. They never realize that it's impossible for the conditions that have arisen to endure indefinitely. Everything, including the life of every single person, must ultimately break apart. Attaching and clinging to anything is suffering. If we deludedly attach to anything, it will cause us to suffer. I understood and accepted the insight that I just experienced and recognized that it was the intrinsic nature of all things. I therefore let go of the normal understanding and allowed things to be as they are naturally, without taking the knowledge of the sabhava dhamma that I had seen to be either my own or self. I was confident that my mind had separated from physical inanimate form, as no feelings of attraction or aversion towards such objects arose upon seeing them. In seeing, there was just seeing. My mind was indifferent. The mind of any person who accesses this state will understand for themselves the meaning of the words, when seeing, there is just seeing. No matter how much I say, anyone who has never experienced this state will be incapable of understanding it. Even if they did understand, it would only be according to their memorized knowledge, but in truth their heart doesn't see it clearly in accordance with ultimate reality. For those who understand according to what they've read or heard, there's no way that the mental defilements can be eradicated, because whenever they see forms, the defilements will arise again as attraction and desire. However, the inward state of one who has accessed the true reality of all phenomena as they exist in nature will not experience any attraction or aversion. To whatever degree the mental defilements have decreased, happiness will arise to that same degree. This happiness is not happiness as most people understand it to be. This happiness has no suffering concealed within it. What kind of happiness might that be? It's the happiness that emanates from peacefulness and calmness. The Lord Buddha said there is no happiness greater than peace. So what is the happiness that issues from peacefulness like? This happiness isn't the kind that arises from the peace and stillness of a concentrated mind. It's not the rapture and happiness of concentration. Rather, it's the happiness and bliss that issues forth once the kilesas are at peace. As a result, the mind becomes even more peaceful and calm, owing to the absence of the kilesas which have been reduced by a degree. I say this happiness has no kind of suffering or discontent concealed within it, because in this state of happiness, there no longer remains any feeling of attraction or aversion. This is why the Buddha said there is no happiness greater than peace. Normally, as we practice samadhi, once the mind has become concentrated, feelings of happiness and lightness of body will arise. But when we emerge from samadhi and the mind receives sensory impressions, it will again give rise to feelings of pleasure or displeasure. In this case, it could be said that the mind is peaceful, but the kilesas are not. With regard to the kilesas being peaceful, it still happens within the very same mind, but it now sees in line with the reality of natural phenomena. In doing so, the kilesas are brought to peace, with there being no feelings of attraction or aversion arising when experiencing sensory impressions. Deep within my heart, no matter how much I believed that my mind had parted from all material, inanimate objects, I still didn't allow myself to be complacent and disregard the things that I had abandoned. I kept a vigilant watch over my mind. Ever since the moment my mind saw the true state of conditioned phenomena with its implicit decay, it was as if my mind had been turned over, causing two clear changes within my mind. Firstly, with regard to my feelings of love and affection for other people, these feelings had completely disappeared. I didn't feel love for anyone. My mind felt that there were no men or women. Everybody shared the same nature and that they all must decompose and ultimately return to the elements. This was how my mind perceived the reality of things, and so it didn't know why it would want to love any compounded phenomena that's assumed to be human or man or woman. All love and affection was completely severed in that moment. Instead, these feelings were replaced by new feelings, namely those of metta and compassion towards my father, brother, and relatives. I wanted them to know and see as I did, because it would enable them to see things in line with the truth, thus alleviating their suffering. When they meet with separation from one another, they wouldn't be saddened or distressed, because such occurrences are perfectly natural. For it is said, all that arises must cease. All conditioned things must ultimately decay and break apart. When hearing or reading these two sentences, it should be easy to understand them, because they are both very clear. But those who insightfully know like this are the rarest people of all. Now it turns out that my feeling of love has disappeared, only to be replaced by feelings of metta and compassion for all people. I want everyone to know and see in accordance with the Buddha. The second change regards the matter of desire, particularly the desires and wishes of the mind. From the moment that my mind witnessed the degeneration and decay of everything, it no longer felt any attraction or aversion towards any physical, inanimate object, because it realized that everything which comes into being must ultimately break apart. I perceived everything as being only the four elements and remained in an equanimous, detached state by not taking pleasure or displeasure in anything at all, because I clearly understood that any kind of wealth or riches, all without exception, are merely elements. Gold or diamonds have no greater significance than pieces of ordinary stone. We have only agreed by consensus that they are gold or diamond, but they have no intrinsic value at all, for all things are equal in nature. My mind looked upon everything, including all kinds of riches and wealth, as being worthless, possessing absolutely no true essence or meaning. They are all one and the same. As a consequence, the feeling of desire within my heart had decreased, leaving only the feeling of just wanting to make use of things as a support in my quest for the way to not take birth again. Within my heart there no longer remains the desire to obtain any fine or beautiful objects for my possession. About 2 weeks after sending the letter to my father for him to take to Lumpur Cha, he came with a group of my relatives to visit me at Wat Papong. I hadn't seen my relatives for some time, and so we all got involved in conversation. My father related how he took my letter to Lumpur, and that Lumpur had him read the letter out for him to listen to. My father made a tape recording of Lumpur's response for me to listen to on a later date. He turned on the tape recording for me to listen to. Having listened to my father read the letter, Lumpur answered, "This is his wholesome, supportive conditioning from developing the spiritual perfections in former lives. This birth will be his last." Then he continued to speak on Dhamma of different kinds for a short time. After listening to his answer, I didn't become self-important or forget who I was. I said to all my relatives who were gathered that what Lumpur had just said might be true, but then again it might not be. If I don't practice, then it might not be as he said. If I do practice and don't become discouraged along the way, then it's possible it might be as he said. It all depends on me. Before returning home, my father asked if I wanted to keep the tape, but I declined and told him to take it with him. At that time, I was quite focused on my meditation practice and had no interest in keeping hold of anything that I considered to be superfluous. Also, before I received Lumpur Cha's reply, I had already obtained the answer from my own practice and understood all the questions and doubts that I'd had. Okay, so I think I might just end there for today. Does anyone have any questions or comments?
I was curious, there was some mention in there about contemplation of food, of the repulsiveness of food. Do you have any advice on practical application of how to contemplate food, to reduce sensual desire when it's arising in the mind?
Definitely, I'll answer that one. And we can probably make the safe assumption we're not quite at the same level as Ajahn Dtun just yet. So I've never seen anybody here make the determination that, for example, if I have any desire for this food, I'm just going to push it away and not eat, because the mind's not subtle enough yet to know that. Because the desire for the food gets mixed in with the actual hunger of the body actually needing nourishment. And so I've always seen it be a disaster when people make that aspiration. They just end up eating 1 or 2 bites just for a few days, pushing the bowl away after 2 bites because there was desire arising in the mind, but they didn't really understand that it was just the hunger of the body and the desire getting mixed in with that, so they weren't able to separate it out. Whereas Ajahn Dtun already had samadhi, he was able to separate it out right at the beginning when he was in Anagarika. Since he had those experiences of meditation as a layman, where he was already seemingly skilled in the jhanas based on his cultivation in past lives. And so, I've never seen anybody succeed with that type of a resolution here. It's only the type of resolution you would generally make when you have a maturity of practice and your mind is already able to separate those things out. So it is good to watch the desire while you're eating, but to not make that type of a resolution where, I vow that I won't allow any sense desire to arise in my mind, because that can't be done by an act of will unless very, very advanced already in practice.
If you witness the desire arising while you're eating, is it good to contemplate something like rotting food, moldy food, or something like that?
Yeah. Yeah, or you can say like earth element, earth element, earth element. That's a good one.
Sudhīro, apparently in the Q&A, Ajahn Dtun said one should have samadhi before they practice asubha. Do you agree, or do you think asubha practice can be done in a way that's beneficial before samadhi? I don't know even what maybe Ajahn Dtun, how he would have defined samadhi.
Yeah, I'm not sure if that's what he said, but because I asked that question about asubha, but he did say that if you get depressed or dejected, then to stop doing asubha, but that it can lead to samadhi. Asubha can lead to samadhi. I think he said that, and then samadhi can then act as a base for the asubha to become stronger, which then further leads to more samadhi. That's like in Ajahn Mahaprabhu's talk, Wisdom Develops Samadhi. He talks about that. What else has any? What else? Dhamma or Sudhīro.
Yeah, no, reinforcing that, I certainly at times are very used to do asubha, as a tool for developing samadhi. I think it's pretty clear even in the teachings of the Buddha that you don't need to. That is one of the tools for developing samadhi. It's one of the four establishments of mindfulness is doing all of these kinds of practices with mindfulness and clear comprehension in order to develop right concentration, develop samadhi. And they work in tandem. Each support each other. It's my experience anyway.
Yeah, I was thinking I can remember actually one of the times when Ajahn Dtun was visiting here, and there was like a Q&A where somebody asked him like, how much samadhi do you have to have before you contemplate things, and he gave the simile of like a knife. So he said it's like, how sharp does the knife have to be in order to cut something? And he said it's just however sharp, whatever is enough, basically. So it's kind of like through, sharpening it a little bit, and then kind of trying it as well to see if it cuts through or not. So yeah, like Ajahn Yuniko and Ajahn Krunadhamma was saying, it's kind of maybe something that we cultivate both of them together, like samatha and vipassana, and even just being able to make the mind a little bit peaceful can be enough to be able to kind of start to cut a little bit into some kind of contemplation like a supa, and then that actually like strengthens the samatha as well.
I thought it was very curious that he made his determination about food after experiencing aversion to the coconut jelly, rather than, you usually hear about eating a bunch of cake or something and then being disgusted with oneself, but he was disgusted with himself for being disgusted with his food. And I've also heard people say that if you're experiencing aversion, then you're doing a suba wrong. And I'm curious, if that were happening while eating, what would one do to correct their practice?
I could be reading into it, but it's just like he ate that coconut jelly thinking like he wanted to enjoy it, and then like the texture and everything felt disgusting, so he spat it out. So he's kind of like, oh, this is kind of disgusting. How refined my taste has to be for me to be able to enjoy something. So like, why couldn't I just eat it even though it wasn't something that I liked in terms of the texture and the taste. And then I think it was more like, going toward that thing he was disgusted with in order to call into question that refinement of greed that he needed he needed something that was like the proper refinement of taste for him. That's what I'm reading into it anyway.
I've done that practice where you mix up your food a whole bunch before you eat it, and it didn't really seem to change too much. It was just kind of like, this is still good.
I did that too. I found a really strong, refined ability to sort out all the different delightful flavors within that helpful way that I'm not speaking. This is a party.
But I can solve the aversion towards eating those what I'm going to get next. That's something like this. Then you might have like a piece of cheesecake in your bowl or something, and then it gets just a bit of spaghetti sauce on it, and you can't bring yourself to eat it. And so if you do just determine to mix up your cheesecake with your spaghetti, then suddenly you can eat anything really. And to an extent it's helpful. It teaches you a bit about your mind.
It is a good practice, coming back to Eric's question, and it's like because most of us won't be at that level of being able to just say, rejecting the food if we have a moment of desire or whatever, but we can actually do those skillful methods to lessen it. There were these, in the early days of Luang Por Chah was teaching about contemplating food in this way and mixing your food together and whatnot, and there was the kind of almost like a contest among the early disciples of Ajahn Chah. They were mixing their food together but finding methods to overcome the desire for food, and even though they found that even a lot of them were finding even if they mixed their food together, they would still have desire for food. So Ajahn Ruangrit seemed to get the award for the best method, which was he would take a Coke and he would pour an entire Coke into his bowl, and that made him overcome the desire because it was all bubbly like it is in the stomach. So I saw one monk do that here. Didn't seem to work for him as well as it worked for He took the bubbly grape juice and poured it into his bowl.
When I asked Luang Por this question in Antarctica, he recommended just counting your bites and maintaining mindfulness initial practice, which I found very helpful.
Neutral.
Ajahn Yanako, I've noticed for myself that like contemplating food, it seems to have like two phases. It's like while going through the line and taking the food, and then while eating it, it's like guarding your mind against desire while taking it, and then guarding your mind while eating it. And so, do you have any advice on like taking food? Because it seems very hard to control the mind from going out, and there's just like all this variety of like central topics that are pulling your mind outwards.
Yeah, there are those two different practices. So like getting the food in the line, my own practice is just to try to not calculate it too much, but just like throw the dishes in quickly. And I have a basic idea now of like what I kind of, how much I need, or what it takes a long time to gauge that, but just kind of like tossing it in without seeing where it's being tossed, and like yeah, it's a tough one to try to, and sometimes testing yourself, like maybe taking a little bit less at the meal line, and then finding it's exactly the right amount, whereas usually we take too much, and then we have a little bit left over. That takes a long time. For a lot of monks I've talked to, it takes at least 8 years learn how to take the right amount in the meal.
That makes me feel a little bit better.
8 to 12 years.
I have a question. In the beginning, Ajahn Dtun had mentioned that he didn't necessarily push the mind until it was ready for something. And with the Suba, and then also like he would see corpses, so was that just something that naturally happened, or did he kind of have to bring that up and kind of test it out a little bit?
Sounds like it naturally happened.
And
It was
then he just cultivated it.
based on his cultivation from past lives.
Mhm.
It was definitely naturally happening. And then that got confirmed by Lumpur Cha when he's in that tape to his father, or that his father got for him. It's like that, yeah, this is from his cultivation in past lives, the parami built up in past lives. And it is a testament to that everybody is at their own place. And that Lumpur Plian, when he visited here, he talked about that as well, and Ajahn Dtun actually, when he visited here, talked about it too. He said that everybody's got different paramis from all their past lives, and that if you feel like oh, I can't do these practices, or they're too difficult, or they're not arising in a natural way, we might feel bad about ourselves because they don't arise naturally, like with Ajahn Dtun. But then he said, well, I think it was Ajahn Dtun when he was here. He said in his past life he was at that place and he had to do the work. He had to do that work that a lot of us are having to do now. So that there was a time he had, all beings in the big scheme of things, all beings have to go through the same process of cultivating these things and pressuring ourselves to bring them up.
And that's probably just about the most important takeaway. This is to take all of these stories, like say from Ajahn Dtun, as inspiring, but not as self-critical, because as Ajahn Dtun just said, he had to go through that process at some point too. This just wasn't apparent in his lifetime.
Yeah.
And so we need to be really careful not to take that as the ideal that we have to be able to experience right here and now, kind of a different stage. And that's good too.
Mm-hmm.
In a way, it's heartening, hopeful.
Yeah.
Lumpur Plian also said something similar. I think Lumpur Plian was more outright about it, whereas Ajahn Dtun was kind of speaking a little bit more indirectly about the past life thing. And Lumpur Plian saying in the past life I was where you're at, so I had to do that hard work, but now it was easier for me in this life. But it's only because I put forth the causes in the past, so it had to be done at some point.
There was a question I had with his, realization is the same realization that Kondanya had, that all that arises ceases. Is that universal for stream entry, or because that's the first time, or do other stream enters talk about that as being a turning point that comes up?
It's the stock phrase in the suttas, all that arises passes away. So I think everybody sees it, but it might not be verbalized in the same way.